Hi, Mark Grant here, clinical psychologist, and here to talk to you today about how to make your anxiety work for you. So we hear a lot about how to manage anxiety and how to cope with it, how to control it, but I want to come at it from a slightly different angle, although we'll be talking about those things a little bit as well, and show you how you can make anxiety um, something that can be productive and helpful for you in your life, and something that can actually make you feel good about yourself rather than not good. So we're going to cover 4 basic steps to do that. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit to you about what anxiety is and why it exists, understanding anxiety. Then I'm going to take you through a little exercise to help you accept your anxiety, because a lot of people are basically trying to pretend that they're not anxious and to hide their anxiety, and that's not actually being very nice to yourself. Thirdly, we'll go through a few skills for managing your anxiety. Some of them you might have seen before, one at least I think will be new to you. And finally, we'll look at 7 steps that you can take, 7 things you can do that will enable you to make anxiety a positive force for you in your life. So here we go. Number 1, what is anxiety? Anxiety is by definition a feeling of apprehension in response to an imprecise or unknown threat. So it's about the future really, which is different to fear, which is about the present. It's about fear is triggered by something that's happening right now in front of you, whereas anxiety is that vague sense of apprehension you have about something that's coming up, something you don't know, what the outcome of it's going to be or how it's going to turn out. Uncertainty is a big factor in anxiety. Either way, fear or anxiety, you often experience what's called the fight or flight response, which is that feeling you get when your nervous system is really aroused, your heart's racing, you're sweating. There's a release of cortisol, which increases your blood pressure, and the sugar, which gives you energy, and your liver's releasing glucose to give you fuel. So your body's all amped up and ready to deal with threat and danger. Both anxiety and fear involve a certain level of muscle tension, maybe tightness in your chest, accelerated heart rate, indigestion, perspiration, and mentally there can be a narrowing in your focus of attention, decreased ability to concentrate on other things, and a sort of ruminatory quality to your thinking. Particularly with anxiety, there's more of that worry. So where does anxiety come from? Well, it's 30 to 40% genetic. So there's a fair chance that if you have an anxious disposition, it's heritable. You got it from your mum or your dad or some other relative. It can also come from a little bit from the way you were brought up. So this is a picture of my family, which is actually quite a normal family in many respects. But my father was a very can-do kind of guy, and I kind of grew up with the belief that if I had a problem, it was up to me to sort it out. He would have helped me if I'd asked him, but that was the message I got. My mother was sort of the opposite, very helpful and wanting to be involved. And again, for that reason, I sort of tended not to go to her. So too much of mum, not enough of dad. That had an effect on how I cope with anxiety and feelings of doubt about my ability to cope with certain situations. And I'll talk to you a bit more about that later in the talk. Of course, things that can happen to you in life. So at least 50% of people will experience some sort of life-threatening event in their life, which can cause what's called post-traumatic anxiety. It can be a car accident. It could be the diagnosis of a life-threatening illness or just any chronic disease. And Again, getting back to family, we live in very busy times. A lot of parents are just, multitasking and maybe not having the time to give their children, as much emotional nourishment and connection as they really need, and that can exacerbate anxiety. Well, and there are lots of different types of anxiety. It comes in different flavors. So you've got phobias, could be agoraphobia, fear of wide open spaces, generalized anxiety disorder, which is a excuse me, coming down with a cold here. Generalized anxiety disorder is a kind of constant worrying, rumination, often not about anything in particular, just worried all the time. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which I've already mentioned. Performance anxiety, when you might have a fear about public speaking or something you've got to do. Obsessive compulsive disorder, which is kind of a need to have things under control and routine all the time. And panic disorder, which is when you actually have panic attacks. Here's a little example of performance anxiety from my own life. This is a picture I drew of myself when I was 5 on my first day at school, and the task was to draw ourselves. And I knew that I didn't know how to draw hands and feet very well, so I thought, well, this is a, and I didn't want to ask for help or get it wrong, so I thought this is a no-fail option. I'll draw this stick figure, which, it's got a head, it's got a body, it's got arms, it's got legs. I can't really fail there. But of course, I was really covering up my self-doubts about drawing. So just a little example there for you of performance anxiety. How common is anxiety? It affects 1 in 5 people over a lifetime. It is the most common mental health problem, and it affects women twice as much as men. So quite common. Why do we need anxiety? Well, anxiety is there to help us anticipate danger and to prepare for it. So, of course, 40,000 years ago, when we were living in the savannah or in the jungle, it helped us to anticipate predators and things like that. In modern life, it's about different kinds of threats: losing our job, passing an exam, meeting new people, those sorts of things. In addition, anxiety can actually be a kind of performance enhancement drug. So anxiety makes us try harder, and that adrenaline and cortisol that anxiety produces can help us to increase our performance in all sorts of endeavors. In addition, anxious people actually make better lovers, because anxious people tend to be more concerned about what other people think, about getting on, making sure everyone's happy. They're more in tune with what other people are feeling. So there's an advantage you might have thought about. Anxiety, if you have an anxious disposition, will affect your personality in positive and, if you want, negative ways. On the positive side, people with an anxious disposition tend to be people pleasers. They make very loyal friends. They're planners. They like to be prepared and to know where they're going. They're more analytical. They're more likely to be perfectionistic, which in certain kinds of jobs can be a real advantage. They tend to be achievement oriented. They like to see goals being achieved. And they tend to be more persistent. They don't give up, because to give up is to fail, and that'll make you feel more anxious. So a lot of positives about anxiety. On the negative side, there can be a bit of a tendency to overthinking. It can be hard to make decisions for fear of making the wrong decision, which can lead to procrastination. may be a bit hard to be spontaneous because of the lack of control that can involve and the uncertainty. You may not like change. You may find it hard to relax. The worry and tension that is associated with anxiety can cause insomnia and, of course, fatigue. So these can be the downsides of anxiety. As I mentioned, worrying too much, fatigue from lack of sleep, and sometimes some anxious people can turn to cigarettes or drugs or alcohol as a way to assuage their anxiety, or eating, or keeping busy. And if you overdo those things, they can be problems as well. So, how to make anxiety work for you? Maybe you can turn those feelings of anxiety into a force for good. So we've talked a bit about anxiety and why it exists and some of the uses that it can have. Now I want to talk a bit about accepting anxiety. First of all, anxiety is natural. I think I've already made that point. It's necessary for survival and useful. It's not a sign of weakness. Get that through your head. It's not a sign of weakness. But if mismanaged or not understood, it can be a problem. It can cause excessive worry and tension, insomnia and fatigue, and addictive behaviors. So the first thing you have to do is to accept your anxiety. And accepting your anxiety is not an intellectual process. It's an emotional process. And it's really about recreating that missing affirmation and validation that you might not have got as a child about it being okay to have anxiety and to express it and to get help coping with it, like the child there in the picture. So childhood is a crucial time for healthy emotional development. And a child has to feel accepted and supported as they face emotional challenges in life and experience their own anxiousness. A child has to feel that it's okay to be different, that it's okay to be anxious, it's okay to not know, and that help is there if they need it. Many of us grew up in families where the expression of vulnerability was not encouraged. The reaction might range from being misunderstood or ignored to outright ridicule. So this lack of safety, emotional safety and emotional nourishment warps a child's normal emotional development and leads to a kind of schism in the psyche. The child internalizes the unspoken message that showing anxious feelings is not okay, and they learn to have a sort of mask that they're coping, that they haven't got any problems. But at the same time, there's maybe a sense of shame or defectiveness for having these anxious feelings that they don't feel able to show. So the child has to have some sort of corrective experience to restore a sense of okayness with or without anxiety. Some of you listening might have such a child within you who can hear what I'm saying. And what I want to take you through now is a little exercise where you can acknowledge that part of yourself, that part that's always there inside you. And if you're a parent or even just have contact with children, you know that children need validation and acceptance and affirmation. They need recognition. They need reassurance. They need attention. They need to feel accepted and safe. when a child comes to you crying, you don't tell it to shut up or that it's silly. You validate that child and you pick it up and you hold it. So I'd like you to take a moment now to go back and see yourself as a young child who perhaps was missing something they needed to feel okay about themselves emotionally. Remembering yourself as a young child, probably somewhere between the age of 5 and 10, a time when you weren't getting the acceptance and the validation that you needed. When you've got that, I'd like you to imagine saying to your young self that I see you and I know how you're feeling and I know what you need. Just the way you would to any other child. And I promise to be there for you from now on, to that part of yourself. Just imagine, if you're not already feeling it, how that part of yourself would feel. That's right. And noticing what you feel in your body now as you have that conversation with yourself. You might feel a sense of softness in your chest and a looseness and a relaxation and a letting go. You might notice your breathing slowing down. And then maybe imagine picking up that little child and holding them to you. And again, just feeling what that feels like in your body now. As you hold that younger version of yourself, to your adult self, and comfort it and reassure it, and letting it know that it's accepted and that everything's going to be okay. As you embrace that part of yourself. And you will feel different after this exercise. And you can repeat this exercise just by replaying it. And you will feel more integrated, more grounded, more embodied, and calmer. And definitely, actually, less anxious. So, that's acceptance. Now let's talk a little bit about managing anxiety before we get on to teaching you how to make your anxiety work for you. So I'm going to just describe 4 tips for managing anxiety. There are dozens I could mention, but just for the sake of the time that we have here, these are 4 ones that I think are really good and a little bit different and helpful. Mindfulness, facing your fears, learning how to tolerate uncertainty, excuse me, and bilateral stimulation. So here we go. Mindfulness is the opposite of what you feel when you're anxious. Because when you're anxious, it really means that you're caught up in your thoughts and you're actually disconnected from what's going on around you and what you're experiencing. So the opposite of that is to be mindful, which is to just notice your environment, what's going on around you, and your feelings and your response to that without judging. You can help that process by tuning into yourself and focusing on your breathing, for example, and just accepting what's happening in each moment in the present and staying focused on that and noticing any distracting thoughts or thought patterns that you might be having and letting them go and returning to your awareness of what you're experiencing and what's happening in the moment. And you don't have to sit in the lotus position and chant anything or do any weird practices to do that. You can do that when you're walking down the street or just in your own house. It doesn't take any special circumstances. Just being quiet and being present to yourself in your everyday life. Secondly, to some degree you have to face your fears. So you can see that picture of the boy as he's getting ready to skate down that hill, and it looks pretty scary. But there's something that isn't in that picture that you've got to know, and that is that that boy has practiced skateboarding on smaller hills before he got to that hill. So he's used baby steps to get to that point. And that's what you've got to do with anxiety. He's practiced his skills at skateboarding, so he's done some preparation. So preparation also helps alleviate anxiety. And he knows how to do what he's about to do. He's got ability to keep himself safe there. So safety is very important. And all those things, baby steps, preparation, skill base, safety, will help you reduce your anxiety and enable you to face your fears and take on the challenges in your life. Thirdly, the third step for managing anxiety is developing some capacity for tolerating uncertainty. So in that picture there, you can see that the individual is walking down perhaps the less trodden path. And they're going to find perhaps things down that path that are new to them, or some destination where they haven't been before. The point is that uncertainty is inevitable. It's a part of your life, and it's a necessary feeling when you're facing something new. And it's not a bad thing, because it's actually your nervous system preparing you to deal with something new. So uncertainty is not a bad thing. And when you were young, before you had the ability to think, you coped with uncertainty without even realizing it. When you learned to ride a bike, when you made new friends at school, when you found that shortcut through the woods, these things all involved some uncertainty. So if you like, uncertainty is the price of change. And again, that boy on the skateboard has taught himself how to cope with uncertainty by taking baby steps to build up to that point. So the trick is you've got to know that uncertainty is part of life. Dose the uncertainty. And be prepared to let go of your need for control. Just a little. And now my last and favorite technique or strategy for managing anxiety is bilateral stimulation. So bilateral stimulation means simply bilateral audio or visual or even tactile stimulation. It's a treatment element of EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And all I'll say for now is that that's a trauma therapy, which you can Google and find more information about. But the key treatment element of EMDR is getting the person to focus on whatever's traumatized them or makes them feel anxious, while stimulating them with visual or auditory bilateral stimulation. And under those conditions, people tend to relax, and their memories about upsetting events from the past, trauma, or recurring anxiety-provoking situations change, both emotionally and in terms of their belief and their ability to cope. So what effect does bilateral stimulation actually have? It decreases tension, it decreases worry, it stimulates increased relaxation. It has a kind of mindfulness effect in the sense that it increases your orientation to the present moment. It has what's called a distancing effect in the sense that problems or worries seem more distant, and that's a byproduct of feeling more relaxed. When we feel relaxed, things don't feel as scary or overwhelming. And last but not least, bilateral stimulation has also been found to stimulate increased delta brainwave activity. That's brainwave activity associated with restful sleep. And brain scans of recipients of bilateral stimulation through EMDR shows that there's marked reduced brain activity in trauma sufferers, as you can see there in that slide from the red to the brain with less red. So how does that happen? There are many theories about how bilateral stimulation works. One is that it's harnessing what's called an orienting response. The orienting response is part of your fight-flight response. And it's basically the part of your brain that detects novel stimuli and has to figure out whether it's something to worry about or not. So when you hear, if you're walking through the woods and you hear a crack or a rustling sound, your ears prick up and you look in the area of that sound and try and figure out whether it's a wild animal or just the wind in the grass. And we all have that, and we've had it for thousands of years, and that's what enabled us to survive as a species when we were living in the savannah. But what happens with the orienting response is that when we listen to bilateral stimulation, our brain goes into processing mode, trying to figure out whether it's something to worry about or not. And of course, it isn't anything to worry about because it's just fingers moving backwards and forwards or tones. So what happens is the brain goes from a fight-flight response into a relaxation mode once it figures out there is no danger. So if you like, with the bilateral stimulation, we're actually piggybacking on top of the fight-flight response to activate it and then deactivate it, which is really very clever because we're actually working with the anxiety response to turn it off. So I've actually created a couple of apps which incorporate bilateral stimulation, one for anxiety called Anxiety Release and one for sleep called Sleep Restore. And if you would like to experience bilateral stimulation and see how it can help you with your anxiety or insomnia or other problems, there's the details for you. They're available in Android and iOS. Okay, so next, how to make anxiety work for you. So in this section, which is really the heart of my talk, I'm going to show you how to channel your anxiety into something useful and productive. And this is a secret that many successful people know, and a lot of successful people in the world are people who actually suffer from anxiety, but they've learned how to manage their anxiety. So as you can see, Adele, the famous singer, Barbra Streisand, another singer, Eric Clapton, the guitarist, you might know his song Tears in Heaven, Stephen King, the horror writer, Michelangelo, the famous painter, Degas, another famous painter, David Beckham, the footballer, Charles Darwin, the originator of the theory of evolution, and Sigmund Freud, the famous psychoanalyst. So what did these people do that you can learn to do to make yourself successful because of your anxiety? Well, there are 7 things that you can do that will help you to channel your anxiety and turn it into a force for good. I'm going to go through these one by one, but just quickly, they are to have a routine, think differently, know how to express your anxiety in a creative way, try something new, take baby steps, know that your best is good enough, and don't give up. So let's have a look at these in a little bit more detail. The first one is to have a routine. There's a famous quote I've got here from Flaubert, who said, "Be regularly and orderly in your life so that you can be violent and original in your work." And Flaubert was a famous French writer, and what he was really getting at there was that the more the day-to-day stuff is taken care of, the more that frees up your energy to do the things that you really want to do in life and that are really important. The more of a routine, especially if you're anxious, the more of a routine you have, it cuts down the level of uncertainty and chaos in your life, and that will lower your stress levels and make it easier for you to focus on the stuff that's really important. So if you have a lot of competing demands in your life and you're struggling to have a routine, you need to think about what your priorities are and create some time to have the routine that will make your life less stressful. Richard Branson, the famous businessman, founder of Virgin Airlines, among other businesses, said, "The most talented, thought-provoking, game-changing people are never normal. In the real world, my dyslexia became my massive advantage. It helped me to think creatively and laterally and see solutions where others saw problems." It's the same with anxiety. If you have anxiety, you will think differently to other people. You'll see things in detail. You'll be possibly a bit more perfectionistic. You'll be more determined to see things through to the end. You'll be sensitive to the needs of others. These are not bad things as long as they're kept in balance. So look at how your anxiety affects your thinking and how you can use that to your advantage. But you will think differently, and it's not a bad thing. Another thing is to express your anxiety in a creative way. That means being able to transform your anxiety into something tangible or useful. As Leo Tolstoy said, art is not a handicraft. It is the transmission of feeling the artist has experienced. Now, you might not necessarily be an artist. You might prefer looking after children or cooking or handicraft things. But whatever you do, you can use your anxiety as a form of energy and channel it into that activity that you enjoy and find satisfying. And in that way, you make lemons out of lemonade, if you like. Fourthly, you have to be willing to try something new. As the famous business guru Peter Drucker says, if you want something new, you have to stop doing something old. And the famous tennis player Martina Navratilova has practiced and learned to play tennis in a certain way. She's got a routine. She's got her skills for different aspects of the game. But every now and then her coach comes along and would say to her, "Martina, we've got to change the way you serve a little bit," for example. And when Martina has to change her serve, her whole tennis game goes off. For the 2 weeks or so it takes her to absorb that new way of doing things. So I guess the point is that if you want to try something new, there will be a period of discomfort. And that doesn't matter who you are, how successful you are. That's inescapable. It's normal. It's okay. Number 5, take baby steps. As Michelangelo said, perfection is no small thing, but it is made up of small things. So he didn't paint the Sistine Chapel in one afternoon. He did it a little bit at a time, section by section, detail by detail. And whatever you're trying to do, if you try to do it, all at once and get to the finish, which is natural because it avoids anxiety and uncertainty, it just creates stress. Whatever you're trying to do, break it down into baby steps, and that'll make it a lot less scary and anxiety provoking for you. Number 6, know that your best is good enough. So Stephen King, the famous horror book writer, has sold over 300 million books, and he's worth over $450 million. And yet, despite all that success, he feels that his writing, until very recently, he felt it was no good. He said, I've spent a good many years, too many I think, being ashamed about what I write. I think I was 40 before I realized that almost every writer of fiction or poetry who's ever published a line has been accused by someone of wasting his or her God-given talent. So whatever you're doing, whatever you want to do it to the best of your ability, and don't compare yourself with others. Finally, don't give up. So Eric Clapton, the famous guitarist, had social anxiety as a teenager, and he couldn't get a girlfriend. So he hit upon the idea of learning to play the guitar as a way of attracting girls to himself. But his first guitar was actually a steel string, 12-string guitar, which is very hard to play. And in fact, no matter how hard he tried and how much he practiced, he could never play it. Nevertheless, one of the girls at the school was suitably impressed, and it did get him a girlfriend. However, when it became apparent that he couldn't play a song on the thing, she left him. Now, any normal teenage kid would probably have given up at that point, but Eric Clapton decided to get himself a normal guitar, which was a lot easier to learn how to play. And of course, the rest is history. He's now one of the most famous rock and roll stars there is, and he doesn't have any problem getting girlfriends. Interesting quote from Eric Clapton: an obsession is where something will not leave your mind. So he wasn't just interested in getting guitars to have a girlfriend. He really was interested in music. He was actually quite obsessed about it. And that's what drove him to keep practicing and become good at what he did. So whatever it is that you like, whether it's cooking, painting, writing, analyzing numbers, whatever it is that you like, follow your dream, follow your obsession. That's what will make you successful. So in summary, we've learned about what anxiety is and what its purpose is. We've done an exercise to help you accept yourself as an anxious person. We've looked at some skills for managing anxiety, and we've looked at 7 steps to help you channel your anxiety into something to help you be productive and successful. So maybe anxiety needn't necessarily be such a bad thing. So I hope this talk's been useful and helpful to you, and if you'd like more information, you can go to one of these 3 websites, all of which are maintained by myself. One is called Anxiety Release App. One is about the Sleep Restore app, which again both have the bilateral stimulation component on them for helping you to manage anxiety. And also I have a website called Overcoming Pain, which has a lot more information about people who might be suffering from chronic pain. Obviously there's a lot more to anxiety than we've been able to cover here, but I hope I've stimulated you to think a little bit differently about your anxiety, and to maybe learn not just to cope with it, but how to make it a force for good in your life. Thank you very much for your interest, and peace and happiness.